Hi, welcome back for another 7 Caillou challenge called Complete the Pattern Number 1. You have to write a function pattern, which we see here, which returns the following patterns. You can see that we are passed in an integer value, and basically it starts from the number 1, goes up to n, and we'll print 1 1, 2 2s, 3 3s. You can imagine 4 4s being here, 5 5s, etc., all the way up to whatever value is passed in. Note that if n is less than 1, we should just return an empty string. We can see string is the return type of this method. And there are no white spaces in the pattern, so you wouldn't want to add any. You want to make sure there's no space added to the end. Of course, these look like numbers here, but they're printed out as strings. So they're taking a numerical value and sort of representing it as a string with however many characters pertain to that numerical value, all the way up from 1 to n. So I think that's pretty straightforward what they're looking for. Go ahead and pause the video and come on back when you're ready. Okay, let's get into this. So I'm going to start. There are shorter ways of doing this using some built-in libraries with C#, and we'll do those as sort of extra credit at the end. But at first, I'm just going to solve this problem like we're going to pretend we don't know anything about LINQ. That's LINQ, Language Integrated Query, I believe is what that stands for. So it's a very powerful tool that you'll see me using a lot in my videos. I recommend learning it and referring to it often until you sort of memorize it, but I don't really push that too hard at the 8 Caillou and 7 Caillou levels. But I do encourage you to stick around if you're interested in that. But first, let's roll our own, so to speak. So let's handle that trivial case first. That's sort of what we normally do, right? We wouldn't want to go into a bunch of processing. We don't want to get to a point where we're generating strings and dealing with negative numbers, right? That's not what we're going for at all here. So we'll follow their instructions. Said if n is less than 1, return an empty string. So you could return like this. Notice there's no space here. It's just double quote to double quote with nothing in the middle. Or if you weren't aware, you can also invoke the string class. It has this empty. So you could put whatever syntax you like. I think I indented that too much. Okay. So good. So at this point, we know we're dealing with a value of 1 or greater. So we can process this generally. The way I want to do this, I'm going to set up some variables. I know I'm going to be returning a string, so I'm just going to set up a result. Again, you could put string empty. I'll use the other syntax here just to show you that's fine too. And then I'm going to make an integer variable, which I'll just call val. And that's going to be we're going to initialize it to the starting value of 1, right? And you can imagine it going all the way up to n, and we'll sort of increment that each step through some sort of looping structure, right? We'll start at 1, we'll bump it up to 2, then 3, etc. So those will be our variables. And then we'll use a while loop. You don't have to. You could use a for loop. So whichever you prefer, just something. I'm going to use while n is greater than 0. And then you can imagine, of course, inside the while loop, each round we want to decrement n, because the danger with these while loops is that they'll go on forever if you don't make the condition false. So it's very important. You might even find it helpful whenever you make a while loop. Maybe you want to address that first and make sure you type in whatever logic you need to terminate the process. So that will do that. Now we sort of get into the heart of the matter. Imagine this while loop's going to execute each time for each value. It sort of starts from top to bottom within these enclosing braces. It'll just keep looping and looping and looping. So what do we want to do with each numerical value? Well, we're starting at 1. And what we want to do is add string characters of that particular digit that many times, right? So I could use a for loop. I could say for int I equals 0, just a typical for loop here. I is less than val, and increment I each time. Because remember, when val is going to be 1 to start, and I initialized at 0. 0 is less than 1. But you can see one time through the for loop, it's going to increment I equal to 1. I will know 1 is no longer less than 1, right? They're equal. So hopefully you see that the first time through this will only execute once, but as we increment val, it'll execute one extra time each time. And if you weren't sure of that, right, I encourage you to add these console write line statements, print out your variable values so you can sort of monitor that. We can put result. Basically, I'm just going to keep appending answers here. You can see, you get a hint in the tests down here, right? You can see what input they're providing and what they're looking for. And if you weren't aware, you'll see these \n's in here. You can probably tell they're like delimiters, and they're sort of separating each part of the answer. You know, the 1s, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s. When you see these backslashes in strings, they're escape characters, escape sequences. So \n, there's \t. You can just search C# escape sequences. You can find a list of these. \n represents a new line, and you can see from their picture, right, how 1 is on one line, then 2 2s are on one line, and then 3 3s are on their own line. They didn't just put it all on one line. They could have written 1 2 2 3 3 3 4 4 4 4, etc., all on one line. But since they didn't, they're expecting some new lines to be injected. So I'm going to handle that properly too. So first things first, let's make sure we're adding val, the digit in question, the correct number of times. And then remember, this for loop will keep repeating however many times is necessary. And by the time it's done, then we can sort of append this sequence. This isn't quite right, but I'm going to leave it like this. We'll see where it's not quite right. But anyways, it's very important to update our variables here. So we're decrementing n to keep moving toward, keep processing, moving forward and terminating properly at the appropriate time. And of course, we want to bump val up every time through this while loop as well, right? We don't want to go 1 1 1 1 1 1, right? You got to make sure that value is being updated as well. So this won't quite get us there, but I want to illustrate just so you can see why I do. Okay, return. So you can imagine this result kept having each of these lines appended to it one at a time. If you didn't know that plus equals syntax does that, that's equivalent to saying result equals result plus. So these are equivalent. You can probably see why people like this shorthand syntax. So in case you didn't know. Anyways, let's run a test. And you can see it's not quite right here. You can see we got a new line, this first test here, with just the value 1. It should have just returned 1, but it put a new line at it. So you can imagine this would also, for that second example, if it would have run, it would have did 1 \n 2 2 \n. So basically what you don't want is that very last new line character added. So just very simply, how I can get around that, I could say, just make sure that n is greater than 1. And this will prevent, on that last time when n gets decremented to 0, for the very last step through here, that we won't append a new line character at the end. That's the idea there. So that should clean that up. Good. And again, if you were confused, you could cut this, paste. You could have, if you want to see how this stuff works, you just add a console right line. What do you want to see? Just put whatever variable you want to see in here. Just whatever part of the logic is confusing to you. If you're not sure how it runs, I might have to expand this. But yeah, now you could see, I got the 1, the 1, 2. So I wrote results in here. Maybe you want to see val 2. Like I said, whatever you want to see. It's helpful sometimes when you're not getting the results that you want and you just want to do that. Comma 1. So that wasn't very helpful. The output's kind of ugly. Sometimes you have to add text so you can see. So you can see result was nothing, right? It started as an empty string when val was 1. Result was nothing, but you get the idea. You can see whatever kind of processing that you want to see. In fact, I'm gonna just undo this to get back to, you can Control Z to undo. And so yeah, like if we run the full attempt just to make sure this is right, I think it is. So we pass. You could submit it this way. This is rolling your own. This is perfectly fine. Short code, not too much going on here. It's important that you can do this. So I actually recommend, I think it's better for you to do it this way if you're a beginner, as opposed to just jumping into the, excuse me, the LINQ libraries. But that said, for you dedicated learners, let's do a solution leveraging the power of LINQ as well, so you can sort of see what that's like. Because you can imagine when you first start, this probably doesn't bother you, but if you've done this a million times, you may not want to type all this stuff out over and over again, and you come to appreciate sort of the LINQ. So before I even get yelled at for referring to things that aren't in the program, I'm going to bring in that library. And then just to give you a heads up, we're going to use one method called repeat, and we're going to use range. And these are the Microsoft doc pages that you can find on it. In general, it's good. I would just leave a tab open with this enumerable and just get to know the names of these. Even if you don't study all of them, you can get a pretty good idea about what they do. And then the next time you find yourself in a problem where you're thinking, man, this seems common, it's probably likely someone's already solved this. Sure enough, take a peek through here and see if anything kind of looks like what you want. And then over time, you just sort of memorize these. I know it looks like a lot, but it's not as bad as you think. I don't use all of them, but, it's good to be aware of. I try to peek in and see what I have at my disposal, right? No need to reinvent the wheel. Unless you're learning, of course. So anyways, repeat simply takes something that you want repeated, you give it the content you want repeated, and then tell it how many times. And you can see how from this, we're able to generate the text I like programming 15 times. Hopefully that's obvious how it applies to our problem. We're repeating numerical characters a certain number of times, a variable number of times even. So the other thing I want to leverage is this range. And it's going to give me a collection from a start value and then how many values afterward. And that's perfect, right? Because we always want to start from 1 and go to n. And so this fits us very well. They give an example, which might be a little confusing because they actually chain it into a second enumerable call. Don't worry about this select, but I want you to know that this enumerable range 110 produces a collection that has the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if that's not clear from this output, just note that what this did is they chained another method on top that took those values and basically transformed them from their value to their square. 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared. So hopefully you could see how these are 1 through 10. So yeah, let's go ahead and use that. That's very useful for us, for our needs here. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this out. You've got this reset button at the bottom if you ever want to do that. Good. We're back to the start. Now we're going to use, oh, but I lost my system link reference. That wasn't very smart of me. Okay. Good. And yeah, there was no need to delete this either, but not a big deal. Return string empty, or just type out the empty string, whichever style you like. And then finally, let's try this. So we knew first we want a collection of numbers from 1 to n, right? So we saw to do that there was enumerable range. And we give it a start value, which in our case is always 1, and all the way up to n, which we know is at least 1, right? Because this clause protects us. So good. And then what do we want to do with each of those values? So I can either stop here. Maybe I'll do this out by the numbers, and then we'll chain them. Var, let's call it nums equals that. So we'll kind of do this in steps, and then I'll chain it into like a one-line solution. So that gives us our numbers. Don't be intimidated by var. Normally we would put a type like int or an array or a list of ints or whatever. The var is just a keyword that you can use where you don't specify the type, and that the compiler can infer it from whatever logic you put afterward. So it knows that range is going to return this enumerable collection. And so instead of typing out that longer name, I just put var. It's just a shorthand, so don't be intimidated by that. Okay, so that's going to give us some kind of collection 1 to n. And then what do we do with it, right? We would say with that select. Do you remember that from they use select? You can check that method out as well. It's incredibly common and useful. It basically just transforms each input. You can think of it like mapping an input to an output, or transforms an input to some other form. It doesn't even have to be the same type, you know, it could be an integer to a string or whatever. So I use it a lot. It's really, really useful. So I know the name might seem a little weird, but for each, it just means for each number in here, 1 through n, select. And then we're going to use something called a lambda statement here, where this is just really a shorthand syntax for a method. I'll go back again, and you can see that you think it's almost like that's a parameter name, right? Like n in our function. And then you got this kind of arrow thing that's, maybe you can think about it denoting that it's a function, and setting up curly braces, or however you want to think about it. And then this would be like the x times x would be like the body of the function. That's all that's going on there. I know that's scary when you first see it, but it's not bad, trust me. So I'll use n for our parameter name, the arrow, and then what do we want to do with each one? Well, we're repeating it, right? We talked about, we had this enumerable repeat that would repeat it however many times we want. So I could say n and repeat it n times, right? And the catch here is that repeat doesn't return a string. Where was repeat? Yeah, this is repeat. These doc pages are really nice. You can see it returns you a collection, this kind of generic collection. And we need it to be a string, so we got to transform it a little bit. And again, if you're not totally following this, I think it's still helpful for you to watch and be aware of these things. Don't beat yourself up, though. It's stay with me, do a bunch of challenges, you'll have it down in no time. So to get it into a string form, the string class has this method called join, where I can take each element of a collection and sort of mash them together. And it's kind of cool because, like, if I wanted to do like a CSV file, I could say, hey, use this comma as a delimiter, you know, or anything. I want a space in here, or, you know, I want JJJ, or, you know, whatever you want. But in my case, they said no white space, and I want the numbers all smashed together, right? So that's why I'm just putting an empty string in here. So string join, And I'll make sure I get my closing brace. I did. I'm going to need another closing brace for the select. It's nice how they highlight that for you so you can keep track. So now you can imagine this is transforming the number to a string with that, the character printed that many times. Hopefully you can see that here. We could say var, I don't know, outputs. We're not going to keep these names, so I'm not thinking too hard on the variable names. And then finally for our outputs, you can imagine these are, so this would be like a collection. Select is going to return a collection of, let me go back to the instructions. It's going to be like 1 and 2 2 and 3 3 3 and 4 4 4. But we, instead of having a collection of strings, we are, per the contract here, required to return a single string. So now I'm going to take this group of strings and just create it into a single string. And so I'm just going to kind of do that again. I'll say return string join. And remember what we talked about too. They're expecting a new line character between each value, right? So that's why I could say you could put the new line in there. We don't want to forget that. I mean, if you don't believe me, just do it without the new line and it shouldn't match. And then outputs. I think that would work. Something like this. So let's try this and see how this goes. Good. Passed everything. That was just the attempt. I'm sorry, that was the test. We can run the attempt. Runs a bigger number of tests, and we're clear to submit. Now, what I tried to do this a little more by the numbers, step by step. But hopefully what you could see here now is that what I have for nums, which is this enumerable range 1 to n, could actually just be put here, right? I didn't even need to make a line for this. It's fine if you do, but as you get more comfortable with this, you'll notice I didn't even need to do that. And stay with me. Sorry. Don't need the semicolon. Now look what I did there. One less line, and I'm just chaining. See, if I would have just come right out of the gates with this, you'd have been like, oh man, what's that? So I just inserted it in place, you know, still generate my range 1 to n, and then the dot there to invoke a method, right? And then select on it, right? And I've got other method calls in here, like a repeat embedded within a string join, and that's all as a parameter to select. You can see how these sort of aggregate, right? They make these compound statements. And then finally, you'll notice that, well, if all of this is outputs and outputs is there, they're equal, right? So I can just take all of this, swap it in for outputs, you know? And you could do something like that, and that should be the same thing. So I'll hit the attempt again. And yeah, ready to submit. So some people really, especially on this website, they like the really short, condensed answers. So I'll go ahead and submit it this way, but they're all fine. Whatever works for you. Take it in steps if you need to until you're comfortable. But I'll go ahead and submit it here for now. So if you stuck around, good on you. Go ahead, and then you can certainly, I always encourage you to look through other people's solutions as well. So you see a lot of similar things going on with the enumerable right range and select and repeat. We did a lot of similar things to that. We had the check for if n's less than 0, and you can see how they kind of embedded that in here. You know what I mean, to really get the solution into a one-liner, a true one-liner. String builder, you know, that's cool. Should be aware of that. But yeah, see what you can learn from other people too. Otherwise, I appreciate you watching. I'm happy to be back, and thank you. I'll see you in another challenge soon.